Recently, I finished Final Fantasy XIV's base experience, a Realm Reborn. Okay, I'm already in Stormblood, I've been procrastinating a little bit. When people talk about Final Fantasy XIV, typically it gets the, it'll get better if you can just survive the starting slog that is ARR.
Everyone said the same thing. A Realm Reborn, which is like the first major act of this game, they're like, it's completely garbage, you need to get through it.
And hey, if you do, you get to experience the award-winning Heavensward expansion completely free.
There it is.
But is a Realm Reborn really as dreadful as they say it is? Let me explain from the perspective of a first-time player. Let's take a quick history lesson about me. Earlier this year, I released a video basically documenting my first impressions of Final Fantasy XIV as a completely blind player, focusing on whether the game could impress me in just a few hours. At the time, I had similar videos documenting my experience with popular games, like, I don't know, a little-known MMO called World of Warcraft. And going solely off of that first day of play, Final Fantasy XIV, and by extension A Realm Reborn, was head and shoulders the better product. The character creator was great. I had to self-impose a time restriction so I wouldn't spend hours deciding if voice 7 matched my character's eyebrows, and I still managed to craft perfection on my first try. Freeing is how I describe the first few hours of A Realm Reborn. They hit you with a dialogue option right out the gate, then proceed to never use that mechanic again. But the real winner for me was jobs. My job was Thaumaturge, largely because I had no idea what that word even meant, but even from level 1, the job had an engaging gameplay loop that went far and above some other level 1 titles. But if you followed along my journey, the real winner was the fact that you could, right from the first few hours, experiment with the other jobs the game had to offer. That, combined with the wacky character designs and the over-the-top anime aesthetic, sold me enough on the game. But as I committed to streaming the game casually in my free time, I would begin to rub up against the problems of a reborn realm. I am neither smart enough nor pretentious enough to pretend to analyze complex story themes or their lack thereof. But for an MMO that focuses heavily on story with tons of mandated dialogue and cutscenes, they really skimped on the whole production side of the main story quest. For starters, a vast majority of the main story quest is unvoiced. Not a big deal, voice acting is both time and money, but in its absence, they decided to do absolutely nothing. Cutscenes are almost eerily quiet. The worst part, though, is the silent animations where characters will do this big emotive movement and it'll sound like this. And look, even if time and money were a problem, they already had a huge selection of generic voice lines that they could add to one of the millions of nods that your character will do throughout the very long story. All that to say, the cutscene production feels a bit cheap. But maybe the gripping story is meant to immerse you on its own. Maybe, but what I won't excuse is the general fluff and busywork that eats up the runtime. When I first heard that modern day A Realm Reborn, the one that I was playing, was the trimmed down main highlights version, I gotta say, I feel bad for you day one vets. Look, I'll admit this point is very much subjective, but when you're a walking nuclear missile, the literal primal slayer, running around handing out 8 uniform sets to recruits, seems like a bad use of our personnel. If I had to point to a single thing that earned ARR its stellar reputation, it would be the slow, plodding, ultimately meaningless quests. Worse yet, the story side pulls you away from the other half of A Realm Reborn, the MMORPG side, and the much, much better one. I really like the combat content of A Realm Reborn. I have no idea how popular or unpopular that opinion is, but many of the fans and friends I ended up recruiting to join my ARR journey seem to believe that the combat is mid. Now I think a lot of that is just because ARR dungeons are very low level, and you endgame nerds need your graphics card burning power spells die. All in all, the dungeons, trials, and raids I did in A Realm Reborn were all pretty solid. Trials are by far my favorite. Short and sweet single boss fights, usually with unique mechanics.
This is quite the long debuff. I don't know if I can, am I supposed to do something?
And those unique mechanics make each of them very memorable. I mean, the Leviathan has that reflect mechanic that, again, they pretty much never use again. But trust me, if it gets you once, you won't forget it again. Dungeons, on the other hand, are a bit of a mixed bag. Now, ARR dungeons have supposedly gone over a handful of makeovers, so keep that in mind. But I will defend ARR for having non-linear dungeon design. Some people absolutely hate it, but recently on a leveling roulette, I watched 2 new players get absolutely lost in Hawk Manor, and as a believer in whimsy and discovery, that's awesome. But dungeons in ARR suffer from some weird mechanical pacing issues. The earliest dungeons, and even the earliest raids, suffer from higher level players trivializing the game. I still don't really know what the final boss of Stastasha does, since he almost always dies before it matters. But then, the next 10 MSQ dungeons play very similarly, without any big unique mechanics. That is, until you get to the final part of a base Realm Reborn, and the game's like, hey, here are 6 different boss mechanics that you gotta learn right now. Some of them you'll pretty much never see again, and others...
Was I supposed to do something there?
Now, Final Fantasy XIV was my first real MMO, so the basic dodge out of these slowly expanding circles was more than enough fun for me. But going from cookie cutter dungeon to stand in the gastric juices and get engorged by your opponent so you can beat up on his stomach wall was a bit of a trip. On that note, solo duties also feel a bit weirdly tuned. Most of them are an absolute cakewalk, but then you get to Cape Westwind, which is the only solo duty that I failed, pretty much till today in Stormblood.
Oh, that was not what I thought it was going to be. I might have made a little bit of a mistake.
But Final Fantasy XIV is more than just a story with a combat system attached. What about the whole... When I think about MMORPGs, I think Second Life, roleplay, immersive worlds. And by procrastinating this video until after I completed Heavensward, I got a lot of perspective on a Realm Reborn. The 3 main hub areas are pretty much always brimming with people. A Realm Reborn alone offers a nice selection of cosmetics and collectibles to help you personalize your cat girl in the sea of millions of other carbon copy cat girls. And yes, that's a dig. I'm always going to be the finest Hyur enjoyer. One area that I'd heard a lot about before diving in was Final Fantasy XIV's music, and I gotta say, A Realm Reborn's again a bit of a mixed bag. Opening and title theme is of course a banger, but Gridania's main theme feels like it's drilling a hole into my head. It's also a bit of a JRPG trope, but reusing the same dungeon boss song for all 53 dungeons doesn't do it for me.
On the flip side, there's the Heavensward soundtrack, which got me going like this.
Then there's housing, which I always love housing in immersive MMOs, but unfortunately, I'm still homeless. But don't worry, the 9th lottery is gonna be the one, trust. Any good MMO is obviously gonna have life skills, and Final Fantasy XIV is no exception. When I heard that you could click on rocks and trees for XP, the inner RuneScape player in me managed to hit level 50 in both jobs before maxing a single combat role. There's always something to do, and I'd be lying if I told you I tried everything, but that begs a question. Did I ever really play Final Fantasy XIV? That was a rough segue, but let me explain. Everyone's experience of a grand live service game will change depending on the time and place, and mine is no exception. Truth is, I pretty much played with 7 to 8 mentors on speed dial, often guiding me directly through dungeons.
Well, we found our DPS.
Now this is hardly a ARR problem or even a Final Fantasy problem, but I often felt like having 75% of my dungeon mates know the dungeon like the back of their hand probably worsened my experience of running the dungeons, trials, and raids for the first time. There are times where I genuinely considered duty support so I could run merrily into the dungeon dangers fully blind. For example, the horror stories of places like Aurum Vale and the Coils of Bahamut, which I still have to do, by the way, so follow on Twitch, YouTube, or Discord, and maybe you'll be called to action. One area where a Realm Reborn might be better than Heavensward is in its open zones. Just traversing around and seeing the awkward terrain was an adventure in of itself. Yet, because I had people to entertain and people offering to do so, I often just hitched a ride so I could get to the story and combat quicker. But that's not a Realm Reborn issue. In fact, I think a Realm Reborn gets a lot of flack just because it's the first. That is, it's your first experience with Final Fantasy XIV and its quirky systems. In my original video, I off the cuff mentioned that AoEs felt off in visuals and timing, and now I realize that's just a part of 14's engine. Without staring frame by frame, I could not tell you whether they cleaned up the game as time went on, or if I just got better at managing the strange delay timing in the game.
Auto pull got me there.
In a similar vein, while I can tell you that my current incarnation in Stormblood is enjoying better music, better storytelling production, better combat encounters, I can tell you firsthand that they did not fix the meaningless fluff quests in the MSQ. In fact, had I made this video right after finishing a Realm Reborn, I'd probably be much harsher on the dilly-dallying parts of the game, which in reality are just the quest designer's strange fetish. Look, I'm not going to go to bat for a Realm Reborn, but I truly believe that if you dropped a Realm Reborn for whatever reason, Final Fantasy XIV as a game was probably not for you. As for me, my quest to dress the best is still active.
Good evening, class.
I still have to do the Heavensward raids, and if you want to join, we're always looking for new fodder.